The most common question I get asked on my channel is what Valkyrie to pull for. And then people will literally list out their entire Valkyrie roster. And although I try my best to answer these questions, I think it's a lot better for me to make a comprehensive video so that you can decide for yourself what Valkyrie you think is worth pulling on your account. And just a full disclaimer, I encourage people to ask questions in the comments. If you ever feel stuck and don't know what to do, I encourage you to ask me questions. I do not mind if people ask me recommendations. This is not meant to shame anyone, I just want to inform people on how I make my decisions based on who to pull. So let's get into the meat and bones of the video. Allow me to introduce you to something I call Valkyrie stocks. The most important thing about Valkyrie is how often they're actually being used, as well as how long they're going to be meta for. Most Valkyries follow a steady downward trend over time as they get power crept by newer Valkyries. So generally the best strategy for F2P players or low spenders is to pull a Valkyrie who has the best chance at surviving with the meta long term. So how can we tell if Valkyrie will last long term or not? The answer is, we can't always be sure. For example, the Herrscher Sentience was dominant in the meta for years, and when Herrscher of Rebirth power kept her, everyone thought she'd be dominant for years as well. And you'd be completely wrong, you stupid idiot. Sure, hope you didn't tell everyone that she'd be a strong pull that lasts a long time, but that's besides the point. There's actually still ways to tell if a Valkyrie will last a long time or not. It's just that we can never be sure. To approach this question, we gotta keep these two things in mind. 1. The initial patch of the Valkyries released is always your strongest patch. Number 2. You should always pull for Valkyrie's weapon. Obviously, if you only care about placing the highest scores possible in Abyss and Memorial Arena for that current patch, you just pull the newest Valkyrie possible. But obviously that just isn't sustainable for most players. So instead, we usually look at a few factors. First, how much raw damage can the Valkyrie do? We have seen numerous cases where overtuned Valkyries perform really well outside their intended niches, such as Lunar Val clearing Herrscher of Human's intended boss, Hephaestus, or Thelema taking over Serene's intended boss in Abyss, the Herrscher of the Void. These types of circumstances only occur because both Lunar Val and Thelema have absurd DPS. Lunar Val in the form of just raw damage, while Thelema in the form of both damage and a very OP time stop. Nonetheless, raw damage is one way to determine a Valkyrie's longevity. Generally, you can find other YouTubers' analysis on Valkyrie damage numbers, and they're usually transparent on how broken the numbers can be. Now, the next and arguably most important factor in determining a Valkyrie's longevity is how can the Valkyrie expand horizontally. And what I mean by expanding horizontally is how well can the Valkyrie fit into other teams. A good example of this is Sparkle. On release, she was pretty mid, but once Small Durandal came out, her usage rate went up since she was one of the best in slot supports for Rain Solaris. And this is the kind of logic I use for the future upcoming Valkyries as well. Since both Badam Kiana and the new Herrscher of Human Divine Key both have unknown Astral Ring types, it leads me to believe that they will get higher value over time as we get new characters in the new Astral Ring. There's also characters like Vita, who is just an all-rounder great support for literally every Part 2 team. However, there is something very important to keep in mind when you do choose to pull for Valkyries as well. That's right, it's the existing Valkyries that are already in the game. Let's take Sparkle for example. She is a quantum niche DPS who also happens to be the best in slot support for Law of Ascension. In the existing roster before Sparkle's release, there was Shixel's Imperative, who was also a Part 2 Quantum DPS. There was also Vita, who was the second best support for Law of Ascension teams, and just an all-rounder great support. And Throyo Deception, a very potent physical DPS who was the other best in slot support for Law of Ascension teams. So going back to Sparkle, we can see that if you owned these 3 Valkyries already before Sparkle came out, then you already basically cover 2 of her main roles. Obviously, you wouldn't have the best quantum DPS possible for every situation, or the best Law of Ascension team possible, but you still have teams that are strong enough to get close to the best teams. Basically, if you owned the 3 aforementioned Valkyries, then Sparkle would not be the greatest pull because she'd only be a small improvement on what you can already do.
So basically, your goal when pulling a Valkyrie is to pull someone who covers something that your current roster doesn't already do well, and that Valkyrie should also be able to expand horizontally. High DPS is always nice, but a secondary factor. And if you can find a Valkyrie that does all that for you, then her stock value will be very high.
So for everyone that's been asking me to choose between the new Kiana Battlesuit and Elysia Divine Key in 8.1, or to even pull at all, I want to ask you this. Does your account need a Stardust Valkyrie? If so, then Kiana will be a pretty good choice. Does your account need a Law of Ascension DPS? Then if so, Kiana is still a good choice. But do you need a cheap DPS or support and you already have the Herrscher of Human? Then if so, the Divine Key is good. Or do you just want to guarantee that you'll have future supports for the new Astral Ring when it comes out? Then if that's the case, either of them are good. Let me make it clear that these are not pull recommendations, but just questions I'd ask myself before I pull a Valkyrie in order to choose if I want to pull them or not. And the most important factor in choosing who to pull is to just pull who you like.